What's up, everybody? I appreciate y'all tapping into the second episode of the Do Your Homework podcast. This episode is not going to tie directly in with the first. I'm going to save that for later next week. Right now, I thought it was really important in the meantime for me to get you guys all acquainted with the different candidates. I'm going to break down not just the last debate, but all four of them to give everyone a really good understanding of not just what's been said, but the context in which it was said, and how ideas and policy positions and news coverage have shifted between the first debate and now. Today, though, to avoid going on a 15-20-minute tangent on my next episode, I simply want to talk about the donor class and media outlets' new favorite darling, Nikki Haley. More specifically, her response when asked about housing affordability. There are a lot of policy positions that are actually debatable that I disagree with Nikki Haley on, but this to me was the most damning piece of evidence against her. Has nothing to do with the alleged political favors and corruption, and clearly demonstrated the fact that she simply has no idea what the hell she's doing, which, if some of you are asking, then why would the donor class want her? Well, if you're BlackRock and JP Morgan and she doesn't understand what the hell she's doing, you can hire consultants for her to tell her what to do, and then she'll do what they tell them. Right? Okay. So she was asked a question, and essentially the gist of it was housing affordability. Is it the free market at work, or should the government do something to make housing more affordable? And in her answer, she essentially told me that she doesn't understand economic or monetary policy without telling me explicitly that she doesn't understand economic or monetary policy. Which, as I said, if you're BlackRock or JP Morgan, this is great because you can tell her what to do, and she'll do it because she won't know any better. But you and I, for people like you and I, it is incredibly important for us to get somebody into office who knows what they're doing. So I'll give you guys a moment. We'll go here. We'll play the question and answer, and then we'll break it down a little bit, and then I'll do my homework, and I'll tell you guys why I think she's completely wrong and why I do not think anybody should vote for her in any capacity. So without further ado, here we go.
Homeownership has always been part of the American dream, but it's increasingly out of reach for younger Americans. This year, mortgage rates reached 30-year highs. Home prices have risen $190,000 over the past decade. Is this the free market at work? Or should the federal government do something to make homes more affordable?
Well, first of all, you're exactly right. My daughter just got married, and I saw how hard it was for her and her husband to buy a home. Right now, the average homeowner in America is 49 years old. You've got young people everywhere. That used to be the American dream, and now it's out of reach. But you look at what happened. You first of all look at what the Fed did. The Fed did a terrible job when they allowed all of that money to go through. You saw the Treasury bond rates go up. That affected mortgage rates, that affected automobile rates, that affected insurance rates. And so now we have a high interest rate. You've got a supply issue. Ask any builder. The supply issues have continued to be there. That's caused the rate to go up. And then you've got insurances that have gone up. And so what you have is a lot of younger people who, one, can't afford a home, but two, the banks aren't lending them any money. They've made the regulations so hard that they don't want to give loans on mortgages anymore. So what we have to do is we have to open it up. We have to, one, grow our economy so that people have more money in their pockets. We've got to look at the supply chain and make sure that we are funneling that so that builders don't have to sit there and go overseas to find things. And then we need to make sure that we really stop paying down this debt, make sure that we stop the borrowing, stop the spending. I'll veto any spending bill that doesn't take us back to pre-COVID levels, because our kids are not going to forgive us for all the spending that happened. And as much as everybody wants to talk about how Donald Trump had a good economy, $9 trillion in debt, he did just in 4 years. And we're all paying the price of that, including those mortgage prices.
We're going to come back to President Trump.
All right. So on top of being wrong about just about everything she said about the housing issue, which we'll get into in just a moment, she said Donald Trump added $9 trillion in debt. That is categorically false. It was $7.8 trillion. From somebody who is an accountant by trade, I expect her to know better. Anyway, let's get back into the housing aspect of it. That answer was just a meaningless word salad of high interest rates and too much spending, which of the very many reasons that housing costs are so high, which we'll get into in just a moment, those are literally the bottom two. I'll tell you why just real quick. Interest rates reflect the cost of capital. How much is it going to cost me to spend $400,000 on this home? How much is it going to cost me to spend $2 million to get $2 million to purchase this business, right? So when the cost of capital is high, bid prices are lower, right? So her conclusion that the Fed is to blame for high prices is absolutely false. That Fed hikes are to blame for high prices is false, because the higher the interest rate is, the lower the bid prices are. They have an inverse relationship. Again, anybody expecting to lead our country, I expect to know that. The second part of her answer, which was the too much spending, essentially what she's saying is that government spending is leading to inflation, which is true. And we'll talk about that likely this weekend. If not this weekend, definitely next week. But the fact that it's harmful to borrowers is false. Inflation actually helps borrowers, as the money you borrow today is worth more than the money you'll pay back later. Okay, the one thing that she did get right here is that the median age of a homeowner is 49. That's ridiculous. That has to change. And that is really why I chose this topic and this question to really drive home the point for my viewers out there. I know many of you guys are my age, late 20s, early 30s, either looking to have families or have started families or are looking to get into homes, and it's incredibly difficult right now. And I'm sure many of you are wondering why. It's never been this difficult before. And that's why I think you guys deserve to know. And so you guys deserve to know why this problem exists. And we deserve to have this conversation to talk about how we can fix it. So that's really why we're doing this. But back to the topic at hand. She didn't even come close to addressing the root problem of the supply. Not even close. And then she said, quote, supply issues have caused the rate to go up. I really, really, really hope she meant costs and not rate. But at this point, I don't, maybe she did. Maybe she does think that supply affects interest rates. I don't know. Maybe Donald Trump was right. Maybe she is a bird brain. I have no idea. Not only that, but she doesn't even specify what supply she's referring to. Is she referring to the supplies needed to build a home? Or is she talking about the supply of available homes? I'm not sure she knows. I think she gets, like Vivek's been saying for a long time, I think she just gets all these answers handed to her by a donor and campaign management class that just tells her what to say. I don't think she actually knows what the hell she's saying. Let's assume for a moment that she's talking about the former, that she's talking about building supplies. Well, building supplies would be much easier to get without all the regulations against timber, energy, and mining. Timber and energy, I think those are pretty self-explanatory. You need wood to frame a house. You need energy to power not only to power the home, but to bring materials to site. Very simple. The mining part mainly pertains to copper, which is very important for transformer boxes and for getting utilities in the ground. All the metals that you need for laying down utility pipes and sewer pipes, all that stuff is incredibly important when you're talking about economies of scale, putting out entire subdivisions of homes, which would add to the supply of existing homes. But again, she doesn't touch any of that, not even a little bit. She talks more about her daughter than the supply. It's crazy. And then she blames the supply issue on the rates going up, which is not, the Fed doesn't give a fuck about supply, guys. Let me tell you right now. The Fed's only job is to peg the dollar as a unit of measurement. That's it. They don't give a shit what your supply issues are like. They want to make sure the dollar has value. That's it. And even if the rates were going up, that would make the cost of these supplies less expensive. And I'll explain that really quickly for you guys. When the rates go up, the attractiveness of savings accounts and bonds also go up, because you can get 5, 6, 7% returns with little to no risk. That takes money out of the M1 money supply. When that money supply drops, scarcity and value, the dollar appreciates, and the cost for those supplies would come down. When the cost of those supplies come down, then the cost to build a home comes down, then the cost of a new home comes down. She didn't touch any of that. Everything she said so far is the exact opposite of reality. Her response puts forth the notion that recent hike in interest rates, along with banking regulations, which, by the way, haven't changed since the Trump administration deregulated the industry, and government spending are the reasons why housing is unaffordable, completely foregoing decades of history and the fact that real estate prices hit their peak when rates were at their lowest in 2021 and 2022. This woman really doesn't have a clue. Excuse me. But on this show, we don't just bash on people. We do our homework. So let me explain to you guys what actually happened, which is, I'll admit, much more complex than the short-sighted blame the Fed and government spending that Nikki Haley gave on the debate stage. But as I said earlier, I think we all deserve the truth, so here it is. To understand why housing costs today are so high, we have to go back to the Clinton administration. During the latter part of their tenure, they wanted to try to make housing more available and affordable to lower-income families. On its face, it's a very noble goal. Very misguided in how they tried to accomplish this, but it was very noble. In doing so, they essentially incentivized lenders in Wall Street to issue subprime. For those of you unfamiliar with the business, that means bad. They're just not good. Subprime mortgages by telling them the government would back or even purchase these mortgages via government funds. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are two of the instruments that they use. For those of you who don't know what those are, I'll put links in the description. Essentially what these institutions are mortgage backing firms that either issue new loans or purchase loans from lenders. And the way that process works is, let's say your local lender issues a loan for you to buy a house. Say it's a $200,000 house. You put your $40,000 down. They loan you the $160,000. Let's say over the 30 years, that note's worth $400,000. They'll go sell that note to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, JP Morgan, Chase Bank, insert large firm here, at 90 cents on the dollar. So they'll sell it to them for $360,000. They'll recognize that $200,000 profit immediately, and then they'll take their money and they'll go issue more loans. All right, this is how banks make money. All right, that's just quick deal on how, and that is important. You'll see here in a second. And the way they were able to get many of these people to qualify in the first place are what we call balloon payments, meaning that the payments start small, but then they balloon, get larger over time. Give you a quick example. Let's say you have a mortgage and in month 6, your payment is $500. But then you get to month 120, which would be the 10-year mark of a 30-year mortgage. It would be, let's say it balloons up to $2,500. All right. This gave many people the false idea that they would be able to afford these payments. And after a few years, it began to become kind of normal. And mortgage lenders and mortgage buyers even began to drink the Kool-Aid as well. But over time, when those balloon payments began kicking in force, many people began defaulting on their homes. This is 06, 07, 08. And among other things, it caused the supply to increase greatly as those banks and institutions that owned those notes, who were now no longer receiving those monthly payments, had to try to sell those assets to recoup their losses. With all these homes on the market and with few people to buy them, because once you default on a mortgage, essentially you have, the banks won't lend to you for 7 to 10 years, and we'll get into that here in a second. But valuations dropped because there was so much on the market and there wasn't enough people to buy all the homes. So someone who was paying a mortgage, and let's say you bought a home in 04 at $150,000. By 07, 08, it's only worth, let's say, $100,000. Many of those people said, go fuck yourself. I'm not paying a $150,000 mortgage for a $100,000 home. And then they defaulted, which compounded the issue. This caused the existing supply of homes to skyrocket and the valuations to plummet. Here are some of the effects. If you were fiscally responsible and you were handling your business, 07, 08, never a better time to buy a house. My mother bought her 5-bedroom, 3-bath home, the one I grew up in, pool, hot tub, the works, around $165,000 in 07. Must be nice. Good luck finding that today. For those who were not, the ones we talked about earlier, the ones who defaulted, they were relegated to renting for the next 10 years while they rebuilt their creditworthiness. All right, that's just how the banks do it. They say you default on a mortgage like that, we essentially don't trust you. You know, take 10 years off, rent, show us a good track record, and then we'll lend to you again. All right, now keep that in mind because that's going to be important when we talk about the bounce back. Now, because the existing supply of homes was so abundant and they were so cheap, this crowded builders out of the market. What do I mean by that? If it cost me $130,000 to build a home and you can buy the same home for that same price, there's no incentive for me to build. I'm not going to spend all my money, take up all this time just to make no money. All right, there's no incentive to build. And because of that, for several years, while the economy recovered, we added 0 homes to the supply. All right, now this is crucially important because during these years, you got more millennials coming of age and you have people living longer. So people who would, 40, 50 years ago have died and then had to have sold their homes, their heirs would have sold their homes. Those people aren't there. People are living longer, so they're staying in their homes longer, which isn't a bad thing, but it's taking away from what would have been considered a normal supply. All right, I'll give you a quick example of this. In April of 2011, 3-4 years after the crash, the median closed price on a home in Olathe, Kansas, here in Johnson County, was $176,000. In February of 2014, it was $187,000. It's not even a 10% increase in, 3 years, almost 3 years. It wasn't until later that year that prices consistently stay at or above $200,000. And then by January 2019, halfway through the Trump administration, it was at $260,000. Now, that last number reflects a complete rebound in the economy. We've finally gotten back to pre-2008, or what would have been normal had we not gone into recession in 2008. Those relegated renters we mentioned earlier had re-entered the market as buyers. Millennials had become into age. Those born before 1992, those people would have been 27 at the time. They would have been my age. They would have been entering the market as buyers, and so demand had greatly increased. The supply had dwindled down finally to a point where supply and demand were about even, and developers could get back into the market, and they could start building homes and getting them sold and making their profits, and everything was getting back to about normal. You still had years of inactivity, which were going to be a problem, but we had a chance to catch up. And then, boom, 2020, you have COVID and the wheels fall off. Our COVID response shut down our economy completely, which further stagnated our supply, making it impossible to add inventory. We restricted travel, caused mass hysteria among the populace, such that people who would have normally put their homes on the market or were planning moves had to put those plans on hold, further bottlenecking the market. Those who did choose to move overwhelmingly were ones who had to move, and so they spent anything they had just to do so. It was at this time that you see buyers waiving appraisals, waiving inspections, bidding $50,000 over ask just to get a home. To give you an example, the median price of a home in Olathe in 2020, February of 2020, was $285,000. This is right before COVID, right before the COVID shutdown. Only a year later, it was $352,000. That's a 23% increase in 12 months compared to a 4.9% increase from the year before. Okay, 23% appreciation in a year is not normal, and it's not sustainable either. We're not going to talk about that. It's beyond the scope of this conversation, but that's not normal, and it's not good either. Due to the shutdown of the economy, supplies and labor needed to build new homes were low in stock, causing the prices of each to go up, which means that the price to build a new home goes up, which means that the price to sell a new home goes up. And since people in existing homes mostly chose to refinance when the rates were low and valuations were high, many of them are hesitant to try to move right now because they would have to sell their home at likely a lower valuation than it was when they refinanced it, and they would have to buy another home at double the cost of capital. All right. This is the real reason why housing is difficult to attain for young people who don't already have hundreds of thousands of dollars of equity in their home built up through the years. All right. To me, Nikki's answer proved that she's just not a thinker. She's not someone to understand a problem in the context of history or the conditions under which the problem occurred. Her answer, like many others we'll get into likely this weekend, was incredibly short-sighted, only speaking on the recent hikes in interest rates and post-COVID spending levels as the reason for great increases in housing costs, completely ignoring everything else that led us here. From her response, she'll have the public at large believing, the answer to this conundrum is to lower interest rates, which lower the cost of capital, which will then increase bid prices on homes, the result being the exact opposite of the stated goal to make housing more affordable. Again, everything she said is counter to the goal of making housing more affordable. Everything. She talked about builder supply without giving any indication on how she would increase builder supply. She has quite literally no idea what she's doing. And that makes her dangerous. That is dangerous to have in the White House. So the question remains, why is Nikki Haley their new favorite puppet? And how is she surging in the polls, as they'll tell you in Fox and MSNBC and these other established media outlets? I'll get into that this weekend as I talk about the media coverage of the election from the first debate to now and how this dirty little game is being played right in front of us. In the meantime, I'll leave you with this quote from Vivek Ramaswamy: "Every politician dances to the tune of their biggest donors." Ain't that a fact? Thank you all for tuning in. Please comment with any feedback you have for me. As I've said before, this content is for you. So if there's anything I can do to enhance the viewing experience, please let me know. Thanks again. Till next time.